My daughter-in-law secured the basement bedroom door from the hallway side and left with the children for an outing without saying anything, here in Omaha. I remained by the small window and waited in silence until my son returned that evening. There's a window well outside my son's basement, roughly knee-height, the sort that admits perhaps 40 minutes of genuine daylight each day when the sun cooperates. I have come to know precisely how that light appears at every hour, having spent considerable time observing it. My name is Walter Ostrowski. I am 68 years old, and for the past year and a half I have slept in the Finnish-style bedroom downstairs, beneath my son Tom's house in the Millard section of Omaha. Before anyone assumes otherwise, it is not the melancholy situation you might imagine. It is a solid room with a full bathroom and its own sitting space. Dorothy put up the curtains. We selected this arrangement ourselves. Tom invited us to move in after his mother-in-law died, once he recognized the weight of the house payments we were carrying alone on my pension. We agreed because multi-generational living is not a failure, no matter what some people claim. I worked 34 years on the shop floor at a railcar parts plant in South Omaha, operating the same lathe for the final 19 of those years. That kind of labor teaches you patience with a difficulty you cannot force open. You do not yank at a stuck component. You ease off, examine the entire machine, and locate the true obstruction before you try again. Keep that in mind about me because it accounts for much of what follows, including why I never began hammering on the door. Tell me where you are reading this from, by the way, I prefer to know. It makes the telling feel less like speaking into empty space. My wife Dorothy is 66. We will mark 44 years of marriage this October. That week she was up in Sioux Falls staying with her sister Joan, who had just undergone a hip replacement. So it was only me in the house with Tom at work and Renee, my daughter-in-law of 9 years, home with the two grandchildren, Ellie 8 and little Sam 6. Here is what you must grasp before the door incident itself, because this is the real center of the matter. 2 years earlier, I took a hard fall from the last 2 porch steps. Nothing fractured, but I cracked a rib and spent a night in the emergency room. My doctor at the time, reviewing the fall risk with me afterward, recommended that I put certain documents in order. Not full guardianship. I was not incapacitated, not nearly. Yet the county allows a standby arrangement, a durable power of attorney carrying a guardianship designation that activates only if a physician later rules me incapacitated, naming who would handle medical and financial decisions in that event. A practical step at my age, I met with an attorney, and because Tom and I have always managed affairs together, I named him. Since he and Renee filed their finances jointly, her name was added to the papers as co-agent, the way a spouse's name is often attached almost automatically. I gave it no second thought. The same documents also covered my late mother's modest trust, money intended for the grandchildren's schooling later on, which I had administered alone since she died when I was 54. Folding the trust oversight into the same standby paperwork seemed neat at the time. That neatness is precisely what later caused trouble. Last spring, Tom and Renee refinanced the house to pay for repairs, and money grew scarce. Around then, Renee began asking me, politely enough at first, about releasing some of the trust funds early to cover an $8,000 tuition deposit at Sacred Heart for Ellie. I told her I preferred to discuss it directly with Tom and to involve Jean Hallbrook, the attorney who had prepared the standby documents, simply to be certain we handled it properly, not obstinacy. That is how I ran a lathe for 3 decades. You verify the tolerances before you make the cut. So during the week Dorothy was away, I had already left Jean a message, asking him to review exactly what authority that standby paperwork granted Renee on ordinary days, as opposed to only in a true incapacity situation. I had not mentioned the call to her. I am not sure why I kept it private. Perhaps some part of me already sensed how she might react. On Tuesday afternoon, I was downstairs in my room reading when I heard the door, which locks only from the hallway side by a small slide bolt installed years earlier for Tom's old dog, so it could not reach the laundry, slide shut. Then the garage door rose, the van pulled away, and the house fell silent. I want to be fair because Renee is not a caricature. 2 weeks earlier on a Sunday, I had a difficult night. My knee sometimes behaves badly on stairs, and I dozed off in the recliner instead of going downstairs. I woke around 2 in the morning, stiff and chilled. Renee found me. She did not wake Tom. She made no fuss. She fetched a blanket, draped it over me, raised the recliner's heater 2 settings, and sat briefly on the arm of the couch before returning upstairs. She never spoke of it afterward. I knew only because I half-roused while it was happening. That was a genuine kindness she offered unasked, and I still hold on to it even now because it is true. But that Tuesday, sitting on the edge of the bed and studying the window well, I thought of my own father. 11 years ago, when I was 57, 3 years after my mother died, I cared for my dad through the final stretch after his stroke, in this same city in a bedroom not unlike this one. What wounded me more deeply than the stroke itself was watching how quickly people began speaking around him rather than to him. Decisions were made in another room. His views were smiled at and set aside. I swore then that if the same pattern ever began with me, I would recognize it the instant I felt it, and I would not remain silent the way he had been forced to. So when I heard that bolt slide, I did not pound on the door. I sat down, looked at the window, and thought, all right, now I understand what this is. Tom arrived home around 6:30, tired, tie loosened, and heard me the moment he came downstairs for something in the laundry room. I was not shouting, I simply spoke his name loud enough to carry. He slid the bolt back so quickly he nearly tore the hinge, and the expression on his face when he saw me sitting there calmly, book in my lap, I will not forget it. Dad, how long has this been? 4 hours, I told him. He asked why the door had been bolted, and I said I genuinely did not know, only that I had heard it lock and the van leave. Renee returned about 20 minutes later with the children sunburned and cheerful, full of talk about a park picnic out by Standing Bear Lake. Sandwiches, a blanket, ducks. When Tom asked her right there in the kitchen why the basement door had been bolted, she answered without hesitation. He gets turned around on those stairs, Tom, you know that. I didn't want him wandering up while we were out. I was going to text you. It sounded reasonable if you did not know the rest. If you did not know about Jean, I nearly let the matter rest right there. Nearly told myself she had meant well, the same way she had meant well with the blanket. But I have learned the difference between meaning well and simply not wanting to be questioned, and I had been on the receiving end of both. Wednesday morning, I called Jean back. He is 71, retired from a downtown firm, plays cards with me the first Tuesday of every month, and is as sharp as anyone I know. I told him everything. The tuition request, the lockout, all of it. He was quiet a moment and said, Walter, I want that standby paperwork in front of me before you say another word to that girl. Thursday morning, we sat at his kitchen table. Coffee growing cold between us, and he went through it line by line. It turned out the language covering day-to-day trust authority had never been written to require the incapacity trigger at all. It allowed any named co-agent to move trust funds up to $2,500 without the other's signature, at any time. Whether the principal was incapacitated or not, the exact sort of clause that hides in boilerplate almost no one reads twice. $2,500 would not have covered the full tuition deposit alone, but it explained why Renee had felt so confident urging me simply to move the money along. She likely already knew she could push a substantial portion through on her own if I delayed, and needed my cooperation only for the remainder. Is that how you wanted it? Jean asked. No, I told him, never was. Thursday night I noticed something I had not allowed myself to notice before. Renee humming while she washed dishes, telling Tom over dinner as casually as anything. That she had already telephoned Sacred Heart's front office that afternoon to confirm Ellie's place for the fall, as though the deposit were already settled. Tom looked mildly surprised and said something like, Don't you think we should wait until Dad and Jean finish looking at it? Renee simply waved a hand and answered, It'll be fine, Tom. It's practically already ours to use. She said it lightly, easily, like a woman who had already decided how the matter would end. I sat at the far end of the table and said nothing. I only listened. Dorothy returned Thursday night as well, and I told her everything at the kitchen table with Tom present, because I refused to handle this behind anyone's back the way it had been handled toward me. Dorothy grew very still and very quiet, which with her is worse than raising her voice. She looked at Tom and said, Your father sat in a locked room for 4 hours in this house, and I heard about it secondhand from Joan's living room. No. We fixed this now. Friday the four of us sat down, Tom, Renee, Dorothy, me with Jean on speakerphone, and I said it out plainly. Renee, I know things are tight for you too. I know that blanket you put over me a couple of weeks ago was real, and I have not forgotten it. But you locked me in a room in my own son's house so you could move money I never agreed to move, and that is not something I can let stand. That is not what happened, she said quickly. I locked the door because he falls asleep in that chair, and I was afraid he'd try the stairs and fall again the way he did off the porch. That's it, Tom. That's the whole reason. Tom looked at her, then at me, uncertain. I wasn't in the recliner, I said. I was in my room reading. You would have had to walk right past my door to reach the stairs, Renee. You knew exactly where I was. She did not answer at once. Then fine, maybe I also didn't want you listening in on a call about the school and getting Jean involved before I'd even had a chance to explain it myself. Is that a crime? I was trying to get one thing done for my kids without it turning into a whole legal production. It became a legal production, Jean said over the phone. The moment you decided you could move $2,500 of a trust you do not administer without telling either of its actual administrators. That is not a misunderstanding, Renee. That is exactly what the paperwork happens to allow and exactly what it is not supposed to. Renee's expression shifted through several stages, then anger, then something closer to being found out. I didn't think it was that big a deal, she said at last, quieter. I thought I was just moving things along. Tom did not leap to her defense. He simply asked plainly, is that true? About locking him in on purpose, not the stairs. After a long silence, she answered, yes, I'm sorry, Tom. I panicked about money and I made a bad call. That is when Jean laid out the remedy. Effective that day, Renee was removed as co-agent on the standby power of attorney and as co-administrator of the trust entirely. Tom remained because I trust him, and cutting him out would have punished him for something he had not done. We rewrote the trust language so the incapacity trigger actually functions the way it always should have. And so that no administrator, Tom, any future one, anyone, can move more than $500 without both remaining administrators. Written approval, full stop. Whether the principal is incapacitated or not. Jean stated it clearly, this is not about punishing anyone forever. It is about making certain a decision like Tuesday's never happens quietly again to anyone in this family. Tom apologized to me more than once that weekend and meant it. Renee said little else that day, but she did not contest the paperwork, and 2 weeks later she apologized in her own stiff manner over the dishes one evening while I was drying. I should have just asked you outright, she said. I'm sorry about the door. I told her I appreciated her saying so and I meant it. I am not interested in nursing this like a grievance I polish. I am interested in ensuring it never happens again to me or to anyone else in that house, who someday grows old enough that people begin deciding things around them instead of with them. Dorothy came down to my room that Friday night after everyone else had gone upstairs, and she sat beside me on the edge of that same bed, right under that same small window. It was dark by then, only streetlight filtering through. She said nothing grand. She simply looked at the window and said, I hate that you sat here alone and didn't call me. I told her I had not wanted to worry her 400 miles away over something I could manage. She took my hand and said, next time worry me anyway. I told her I would. I still sleep in that room. It remains a good room, yet I notice the light through that window differently now than I did before. Not because anything is wrong with it, but because I know exactly how long 40 minutes of afternoon sun takes to cross a floor when you're waiting to learn whether anyone is coming home to let you out.